Hi everyone, Nigel Saunders here. The learning never stops in the hobby of bonsai. At this month's meeting of the Kitchener-Waterloo Bonsai Society, Connor gave a presentation on light. Light is all around us, but it can be a rare thing when you're growing bonsai in a Canadian winter. In the plant room here, I use as much natural light as I can. I have large south-facing windows, but in the winter time, you can go up to 2 weeks without any sunshine at all. It's just gray and cloudy outside, so you need to supplement your lighting. At this month's meeting of the Kitchener-Waterloo Bonsai Society, Connor gave an excellent presentation on indoor lighting for your bonsai. This coming up in the Bonsai Zone.
Okay, so I'll get going. Today I'm going to be talking about growing bonsai indoors, lighting the long winter. So especially up here in Canada, we need to get through the winter to keep our tropicals and everything going. So what we'll be going through today is an introduction to what is light, the basics of how light affects plant physiology. We're not going to get too far into that because that could be a whole nother presentation. How we're measuring it and what we're looking for in lights. And then we're going to go through the types of artificial lighting, what to look for, and then if we have time I'll go over what I'm using and just giving some suggestions. Okay, so life as an indoor bonsai. When I got into the club, and not the club, but the profession itself, I found it was pretty frowned upon. There's not a lot of people, you'll get the hardcore traditionalists that don't think bonsai should ever be inside. Though this is normally the first thing on all of the forums that I see is, oh, this juniper is inside, it shouldn't be inside, it's going to die. It's not 100% true for 100% of plants, so it's a gross generalization. For us, it allows us to grow species that are outside of our climate. There's been a lot of advancement in indoor growing technology with the goal of mimicking the plant's environment. So there's three main environmental parameters that we should be looking at. Do any of you guys think, name off a couple?
Light, temperature, and humidity.
Exactly. Light, temperature, humidity. So light, we're going to be mimicking the intensity, the duration, and the spectrum.
Right.
Temperature, we're going to be what they're tolerating, where they can thrive, and humidity is when it's benefit and when it's a harm. But we're only going to be talking about light. So the other two are important, but this section will just be on light. So what is light? Light is the electromagnetic radiation wavelengths to which the human eye is sensitive. So that's what we perceive as light. But there's also a whole other spectrum of wavelengths that are used by other life forms and have other purposes. So most of the solar energy is absorbed or reflected back into the atmosphere and becomes heat. The following summary is of the fate of the solar energy by this reference further provides the elaboration of what light is. So I found this pretty interesting. Only 42% of the sun's light reaches the surface of our Earth. The rest of it, most of it becomes heat. Only about 2% is finally utilized by plants. Of this 2%, only 0.1 to 1% is incorporated into the plant tissue. So that's the stuff that actually becomes sugars. And of this, 20% is eaten by herbivores, and then 30% is eaten by carnivores. So all of the life sustained on the planet is made up of 2% of the solar energy capable. So I'm not going to get into a bunch of math, but it's just important that the energy of the photon, so the light, is negatively proportional to its wavelength. That's right here. So we're going to be talking about wavelengths a little bit. So just note that the smaller the wavelength, the more energy that light contains. That's why smaller wavelengths like UV are damage us, because they're high energy.
X-rays.
Yeah, that's the same one I just said. Okay, so like I said, light is divided into wavelengths. Shown here is the relationship between the wavelengths of the visible light and other types of radiant light. So these are the wavelengths. These are in nanometers, which is 10 to the negative 9. So in the sandwich in the middle, we have visible light, and then to the left and right, we have infrared and ultraviolet. Those are the ones we're going to be focusing on, because it's the part that's the plant responds to. So photosynthetically active radiation, or PAR, we're going to be talking about that again. So that's the basically the energy that is being used by the plant. So it's a photon measurement. Within the visible light spectrum, it's broken in to the rainbow. So we have a violet to red spectrum. Interestingly, over here, this is the spectrum of the sun. You don't need to worry really about the y-axis. It's intensity, so it's a relative measure. But the peaks and troughs of it, this is what the sun's giving off. And below it, was developed by McCree, is what's called the McCree curve. And this is the average plant response. So you can see how closely this mimics this. So the plant is using as much of the energy that it gets from the sun as possible. From that, chlorophyll specifically is absorbed at 2 wavelengths, or 2 general peaks and troughs. So you can see them here. There's 2 kinds of chlorophyll. Both have slightly different wavelengths. But this, as you'll later on see, this is the basis of having red and blue grow lights. It's because of these 2 peaks are focused over red and blue. But like I just showed you, the plant is actually using the full spectrum.
Can you, sorry, Connor,
Yeah.
can you go back? You say it's using this full spectrum. It doesn't. How is it using like the greens in between, or?
So we're going to get to that on the next slide, but a lot of people think green is not used at all, and that's a misnomer, because for example, in large canopies of forest, only the light that penetrates to the lower levels is green light. So the trees will have, actually within the tree, the top canopy leaves will be physiologically different than the lower leaves. These lower leaves are able to get that green light because it's all they have, where the top ones are going to be using the more photosynthetically available light.
Same plant.
Same plant, yeah. On the exact, not even 2 plants in different conditions, the exact same plant. Yeah.
That's interesting.
So we'll just quickly go over a little bit. So we have the 2 UV classes are in the lower range. It promotes pigmentation, thickens plants' leaves, and may be used to prevent harmful insects. Next, we'll have the blue light spectrums. This is known as the foliage or the vegetation power. This is traditionally where the chlorophyll is growing for foliage, for leafage, what we're looking for. Chlorophyll absorption peaks is 493 and 496. The blue spectrum is most efficiently absorbed, so that's why the blue and red are going to be one of the highest. Then we have the green and yellow area. Little absorption of the yellow spectrum, as I said, that's what makes plants green. But new research is showing that the whole spectrum is useful. So it may not be photosynthetically useful, but it could activate other physiological pathways in the plant. And what I mean by that, more of a defense mechanism. So a lot of research is going out that growing under only the 2 light spectrums is putting out a weaker overall plant. And then red, again, is the other chlorophyll peak at 642 and 667. But yeah, 660 is the most vital wavelength for flowering. But I also hear it all the time as blue for vegetation, red for flowering, and a lot of this is based off of marijuana growth. So that where you need a distinct flowering in vegetative zone, but again, full spectrum is always going to be better.
Now it's going to be more research.
Yeah. So we're going to be like my friend does a lot of research in specific light regimes and stuff. He'll program the lights in and out, and where the research is heading, which I think is quite obvious, is the closer you get it to the sun, the better it's going to be.
Yeah, without burning.
So it's interesting for us that leaf expansion, so how big the leaf is going to get, is going to be enhanced by the blue and yellow spectrums.
Yeah.
So this may be important for maintaining a small leaf phenotype. So we all see this for whoever's growing inside, is our leaves are getting bigger when they're inside. And that's because traditionally we're in a blue spectrum, like a lot of us use fluorescents or T5s, those are very heavy in the blue spectrum. So that's why on top of the low intensity levels of the light, there's also only blue spectrum. So we see a lot of elongation and bigger leaves. So wavelengths outside the PAR range have important roles in regulation, the plant's defense mechanisms, chemistry related to the immunology, so how well it can fight diseases, and against pathogens. So light is obviously essential for photosynthesis, and without it, chlorophyll, carbohydrates, hormones, and many other plant manufactured chemicals can't be made. When plants grow in insufficient light, they don't stop growing. Well, eventually they will stop growing, but they develop abnormally long stems with relatively fewer leaves. So here you can see two plants. One is due to inefficient light, but both plants have the same number of leaves and were propagated at the same time in the same conditions. But the one on the right is receiving much more light. This is known as utilization. So the plant respires the stored carbohydrates, and when most of the carbohydrates are respired, then it's going to die. So it's going to use up, there's a balance between the energy stored and the energy used. And if you're out of balance, then it's eventually going to lead to death. A concept known as, you've probably all seen this, but it has a fancy name, Phototropism, is the growth of a plant towards light. This is actually controlled by the hormones. So I know some of us are familiar with auxin. It's promoted in the leaves. It regulates root growth. So in the plant, it's always trying to balance itself. So it has counteractive hormones in the leaves and the roots. So the auxin is produced in the leaves, but manages the roots. And I believe the other one is called cytokine. It's produced in the roots, but balances the foliage. So that's why when we're applying our rooting hormone, it's an auxin. So because the side of the stem that grows, they grow at different rates, the stem curve towards light, but this is due to the auxin production and the flow through the stem. So many indoor plants are tropical from regions near the equator, where the day length varies very little. Most are day neutral and flower because of a combination of age, light sensitivity, and temperature. Time of a photoperiodic plant must be kept under the correct day and night length to trigger a flowering varies. If not maintained long enough, the plant may revert back to its vegetative state, ceasing bud development. A short day plant on a long night schedule will lose its valuable photosynthetic time and may lose vigor. The schedule should be maintained until flower buds are completely developed.
Sorry, Connor.
Mm-hmm.
Can you go back?
Sure.
Short day plant, long night. What does that mean?
So these are specifically for plants that have varying photo periods. So I'm not too sure what kind of flowering species this would apply for our bonsai, but it's mostly relative to cannabis. So they have a different flowering and vegetative state, and I'm sure other plants are like that as well. But so in a short day plant with a long night, it means that the plant is used to getting a longer spectrum, but it's in now a
So it's getting less light.
Less light, essentially, yeah. So on foliage, in many instances, the darker foliage of a plant, the less light it requires. Common plants that grow well in dim light, like the snake plant, the rubber plant, a Chinese evergreen, all have deep green foliage. When grown with little light, they develop a dense chlorophyll layer near the leaf surface, making them efficient light users. Many such as variegated spired plants, tricolor dracaenas, other variegated species, they all lack chlorophyll in that white area. So we can see we have a variegated sarissa, I believe, there. So the areas that are white aren't photosynthetically active. So that plant is getting relatively less light compared to a non-variegated plant. Fleshy and succulent plants with thickened leaves and or stems, such as the jade or cactus, require more light than those with thin leaves. This is because the fleshy structure minimizes the surface area and maximizes it to make sure it's vulnerable to transpiration or water loss. So it not only has a smaller surface area to gather light, but it also has a larger area to transpire the water out of. Yeah. So here in the north, as you all know, the sun is in the south. So the natural light intensity is affected by the geographical and altitudinal variation and many other climate factors. Light intensity and duration are factors contributing to the total light of the plant. So in the northern hemisphere, the sun will always appear slightly in the southern sky. That's why our south-facing windows are the best. Light is lost to the atmosphere, so in here is actually a much longer distance to travel through the atmosphere before it gets to your house than it is when it's directly above the north. So you have a lot of light that's lost to the atmosphere. Interestingly, persistent snow cover affects light intensity by reflecting the sunlight back. So it's actually it's a benefit. Cold areas with snow cover most of the winter receive slightly increased amounts of light through all windows because of this reflection. So you'll actually get more or slightly more northern light when you have snow in front of your house. This principle also applies to your indoor growing area. So if you have a very bright white room, it's going to reflect light better than a darker shade. This is why a lot of time you see in growing greenhouses, they have reflective aluminum or mylar sheets, and that's to efficiently use as much light as possible.
How do you quantify that?
So we're going to get into measuring light, but there's meters that the metal. Oh, anyways, there's sensors that can pick up the direct photons.
The reflecting.
Yeah, so you can have it when there's no reflection, or when there's things, and you can see the differential between the two. So light duration is another strong component of the total light. Increasing the duration can help compensate for low intensities. So that's why when we're growing indoors, it's recommended that you have a longer light cycle, 10 to 12 or upwards hours, because you have a lower light intensity. But below a certain minimum, that is not going to do anything. Equatorial days and nights are equal in length all year. However, in the north, we have 9-hour winter days and sometimes 15-hour summer days. So the plants that are from these zones are used to those light cycles. So it's going to benefit your tropical trees if you keep them in the duration that they're used to, or lower south. So like I said, an unobstructed south-facing window receives the longest duration in the northern hemisphere. The daily direct sun all throughout. West and east facing windows provide the intermediate, while north being the worst. So here we can see, this is just a general guide to light zones. I'm pretty sure all of our trees are going to require the bright light. So depending on the width of the window and the incident angle of the light, you're going to want to keep them well close to the light. But if you have like an ivy or something lower tolerances, it can be up to 2 meters away from the light. And this is very general. It's just showing that obviously the farther away you get from the windows, the less light it's going to be. So overhanging or side eaves can decrease the time that the light enters your room. So the shades, when the sun is high at midday, will cut off some of the incident beams, so you're not getting as much light as you could through your window. Interestingly, Skylights, there we go. They come in 2 kinds. There's a transparent and a translucent. So The transparent one doesn't refract any of the light beams. So you're only going to get the incident rays that are coming from the sun. So as the sun's moving across, the light is also going to move across the room. However, the newer translucent skylights, they distribute the light all the way through.
Some of them have fiber optics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I plan to put on many of these in my home when I get it home. So now we're going to go into the types of artificial lights. So what we're going to be looking for mainly is the spectrum, or the quality, the intensity. So we're going to look at lumens, lux, and par, and the efficiency. So it's going to be how much lumens, lux, or par per the energy you're putting in. I find spectrum intensity the most important personally, having the largest weight factor, and efficiency being the least, because I want to get the right spectrum and the right intensity. But of course, if you're tight in the pockets, then efficiency is going to be important. So we're looking at what manufacturers provide. So what we're looking for, one of the main things that has to do with the spectrum is the color. But confusingly, it's known as the temperature of the light, and it's measured in kelvins. So you'll see lights that are bright office lights. They'll be 3,000 K, and more incandescents will be around the 5,000 K range. So the spectrum, the quality, the closer to the McCree curve. So this is again what the plant's going to be using, the better. So you're going to look for for lights that say full spectrum or sun-like. Intensity, it's a little harder. Sometimes they don't like to put the intensity, but look for lumens. We'll discuss later. But look for either lux or par levels on the package. So you'll see here, light is inversely square. It follows the inverse square law. So as you get farther away, it gets exponentially lower in intensity. So a lot of when you'll get an intensity spray, you'll get also one of these graphs, which shows you where the intensity is given the distance. So like I said again, we also have power consumption, efficiency, and lifespan. Lifespan of the bulbs are really important because even if they're still on, the spectrum could be severely degraded. So you want to follow the lifespan that is given by the manufacturer. So measuring light in relation to plant growth is a complex topic, but it can be broken down into 3 subtopics: illumination, total radiation, and the amount of specific wavelengths. So the illumination is what we see as humans perceive, and it's a lumen basis, or it's based off of the foot candles. So how many feet can you see a standard candle? So a lux is just the lumens per square meter. And then to get from lux to par is a little more complicated, but you can Google these relationships, and depending on the spectrum of the type of light, there's a conversion factor between lux and par. So a lot of things are measured in par. It's more of the scientific accurate measure. It measures the amount in moles. So it's the molar amount of photons. So a mole is just a really, really large amount of something. It's like saying I have a dozen photons, but with a mole it's like 10 to the 28. So it's a measure to measure a lot of really small things. So the total radiation is measured in joules, or mostly watts. We're going to be looking at watts. And then the intensity can either come in lumens, lux, foot candles, or again, there's also a relationship between to par. So in a lot of cases still, the light requirements of a species is listed in foot candles. So it's the illumination of a surface 1 foot from a standard candle. What's a standard candle? Comfortable light for reading, so this is just give you some kind of basis, is around 50 foot candles, and a bright summer day can be above 10,000 foot candles. So the USDA classifies over 100 houseplants by their light requirements. I couldn't find any bonsai classifications, but if you're between 75 and 200, so there's the corresponding lux, that you're deemed a low light plant. Between 2 and 500, you're a moderate, and anything above 1,000, you're a high light plant. It's nearly impossible to give bright light requiring plants too much artificial light because they're used to high intensity equatorial sunlight. To the best of my knowledge, there's still no bulb made that gives off that kind of intensity. So these are PPFD. So this is if you see PPFD, this is a par rating. I think it's, Joey, do you know what it stands for?
Like a part?
No, the PPFD, it's like a proton something flux.
No.
Yeah, it sounds like a Star Trek word.
Yeah,
Anyways, yeah.
While we read it, what does PA
Hey, Google.
PAR is photosynthetically active radiation. So it's the light that's going to be used from the plant. And then you can just think of this as a unit.
Photoactive radiation.
Photosynthetically active radiation. So between 200 and 400, I've seen in a lot they just say PAR, or it's micromoles per meter squared. It's great for seedlings, clones, and vegging plants. Between 400 and 600, this is great for your more mature indoor growing sessions, and between 600 to 900 is great for the flowering, fruiting, and budding stages of plants. Oh, here we go.
Uh-oh.
So yeah, a lot of this research was based on cannabis research, so a lot of it's going to be flowering and budding, but those are just flowers. They apply to every plant. Between 200 and 400, plants growth rate potentially crawls between 30 and 55% of its total, which is recommended for younger or seedlings. Once you surpass the 1,000 mark, you go into what is known as double-ended grow light territory. So you're becoming light limited, and I'll go over this with another graph. So plants can either be limited by the light or limited by the carbohydrates. So at a high level of flux, you're going to need to supplement CO2. We all know that the higher levels of CO2 is better for growing plants. So there's actually a point where you can give it, you can keep on giving it light, but then you need to also increase the amount of CO2. So does
What if you don't do that?
Then you will go into a decreased CO2 zone. So there's a compensation point. So below the compensation point, which is right here on the graph, respiration, which is the plant's essentially breathing, you can think of it, exceeds the photosynthetic capacity. So when we're above the compensation point here, there's a net gain in sugars or carbohydrates. So the rate of photosynthesis, sugar production, is greater than the rate of respiration, how much it's using. So if you're above this point, you're growing well. But if you're below the compensation point, the plant is burning more sugars than it is being produced. It's the same as being on a diet.
Is it fatal?
It can be, yeah. If you're in the zone for too long, you're going to deplete the whole plant's carbohydrates reserves, and it will die.
Is that when they get leggy and stringy?
Yeah. So that'll be around here, but you can maintain. Actually, leggy and stringy is around here, but it depends more on the intensity in spectrum as well. It's not directly on the intensity, which we're talking about now.
Okay.
But it is also related to the intensity.
How can that CO2 be provided for a plant?
So
Breathe on it.
yeah, you could do that. There's you can get compressed CO2. There's a lot of stuff in aquatic plants now. If you're doing like a vivarium or something with animals and plants, a lot of the aquatic plants need high levels of CO2, so they have compressed CO2 cylinders.
If we have some plants that are mysteriously just I mean, 1 minute they're fine, the next minute they start to shrivel up.
They could have exhausted their carbohydrates. Yeah, in a low light environment, they're just in the negative for too long. But yeah, I don't have any images of what that looks like. It'd be nice to see a plant that's maintained in this low environment and see how it fails. So we'll go through the types of light now. So incandescent lights, everyone's familiar with them. It's produced through the channeling of electricity through a wire, which heats up the wire and glows. Compared to fluorescent lights, incandescent lights use more electricity to produce the same amount, but all the extra is given off as heat. So we all know incandescent lights get very hot.
What kind of spectrum do you get from an incandescent?
So right here, so this is the spectrum of the incandescent light, and when you look at it, it looks like a nice orange glowing bulb, and that's because it's very high in the red spectrum.
So it's good for growing.
It would be good if you're supplementing lower bluer light.
That's for flowers, the red light, isn't it?
Yeah, but there's also research that red light is needed to keep a tight leaf cluster.
Okay.
So it counteracts the blue lagginess.
I see.
Yeah, so
Doesn't match the sun.
no.
In other words, if I was running fluorescence, which is high on the blue,
Mhm.
and then I threw in a few of these incandescents.
Mhm. Yeah, that would give
make
it.
any sense?
Yeah, that would give a balanced spectrum, but you'd be losing a lot in. There's better things that will give you the red spectrum than incandescents because they're not efficient and they get very hot. It's not the best growing conditions. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're high in orange and red wavelengths, but low in blue and violet, giving objects they light a warm appearance. So that's why we like them for indoor lighting. It's again useful for the flowering stage, and it makes an attractive spotlight, but it lacks the blue and violet. So you can normally supplement that with a fluorescent light. So moving into fluorescence, these have been around for a long time. There's now compact fluorescent lighting, which is just a large, same science that's going into them. They're just now made for our traditional sockets. But the wavelengths in the light from the fluorescent tubes vary depending on the blend of the chemicals in it. So fluorescents give us a lot of control over the spectrum by the types of chemicals that we can put in it. And that's why now we have grow fluorescent lights that are not just the blue heavy spectrum, but also have higher levels of red. They give off almost no heat from the tubes. They have a very small profile, a very small ballast. Initially, they're more expensive compared to incandescents, but you'll find later on they're going to be less expensive compared to some of the other stuff we're going to talk about. And they're very economical to operate. You can get up to 5 times the light for the same amount of wattage this is all compared to incandescents. But again, the characteristics of the plants grown under the cool white light is great for colored foliage, slow stem elongation, and proliferous branching. So LEDs, light emitting diodes, they produce through a targeted wavelength, a targeted spectrum. So each diode is going to produce a specific spectrum. It's even more efficient than the incandescents. It delivers the photosynthetically valuable lights, which I don't agree with, because they've just taken the basic chlorophyll research and said this is good enough. So we're just going to pump out a bunch of red and blue LEDs, and it works. It's not the best for growing, but it will definitely get you through the winter. they produce the exact wavelengths. Yeah, and the only way to get more spectrum is to add different diodes.
What about the white LED lights as opposed to the, like you're talking about, the red and blue ones?
So those have, I think those have many diodes that are close together. So it's mimicking a full spectrum. So again, this chlorophyll research is based off of why we have red and blue LED, is because the chlorophyll peaks of A and B are above those two wavelengths. So new technology which I've really been looking at is cob LEDs, or chip on a board LEDs. Essentially, it's an LED packet. So there's many thousands of LEDs within a small space. So this allows you to pack a ton of intensity, and it also increases the efficiency. So it can have many types of light sources, like you just said, Nigel, in the same area that a standard LED can occupy. So here, so PPF, so it's micromoles per watt. So this is going to be an efficiency. So here we can see cob LEDs. They have an efficiency of between 1.8 and 2.5. HPSs, which are high pressure sodium lights, we're going to talk about those next. They have an efficiency of about 1 to 5, 1.5 to 1.8. Metal haloids, again, we'll talk about those next. And then fluorescents down here. So you can see that cob LEDs are far more efficient than most of the lighting sources that are available on the market. They also have a substantially longer lifespan, where with your T5s, you're only going to get about 8 to 10,000 hours before your spectrum degrades. And again, your spectrum will degrade before the light breaks. Again, because they're customizable, you can get a wide variety of spectrums. So they're going to be mostly given in temperature colors, but the temperature color has a corresponding par graph. So you can see, you probably can't see, but maybe on your papers, that the 5700 Kelvin is very low in the red, but it's the highest in the blue. Oppositely, 2700 is really high in red light, but low in blue light. So in my opinion, I think things around the 4000 Kelvin mark give the best spectrum. So they're high in blue, high in red, but they also don't dip down significantly compared to the other ones in between. It's pretty close to the McCree curve, or what the plant is using. So the last type of light that we'll go over is, it's still used exclusively in greenhouses, commercial research based, is high intensity discharge lights. So this is an overarching category. There's dozens of types of HIDs. The two most common ones are the metal halide. This is a compact metal halide, or the high pressure sodium. There's also low pressure sodium. There's a bunch. But these two in combination, high pressure sodium and metal halide, combined give you a very good spectrum, and they're also very high in intensity. They're large though. There's three main disadvantages to these. They're large, they're expensive, and they produce a lot of heat. So for those three reasons, they're not really used as indoor growing at our levels. Pardon?
You can heat your house with one of those.
Yeah. Their ballasts are massive, and the standoff distance for your plants, it requires a very tall room.
You need a separate transformer for metal halide. Yeah.
Oh, is it three-phase?
So there was a guy who was calling in the States, Gary Beasley, so he has his own greenhouse, and he has 10 metal halides, and he's probably his ficus, because he's a ficus expert, and they are completely beautiful. But he has they have to run on a specific transformer because of foliage, I believe. And the output of a lot of heat, so it has to stay quite far away from the plant. But he says in his years of doing it that the metal halides have given him the best results from
Yeah, these are still the tried and true grow lights for commercial use.
But the hydro is this.
Yeah.
Big box.
They're like we said in the efficiency one here. They're high in efficiency compared to fluorescents, but they're not the best. But yeah, so they're big, they're expensive, and they're hot. The bulbs are expensive. The hydro, every aspect is expensive. So in between the ceramic metal halide, this could be what he's using, is a newer metal halide type of light, and this gray line here is the McCree curve, what the plant's needing. So it's pretty good. It could use more blue, but it's pretty close to the intensities that are required. So a little summary, CFLs or compact fluorescents. There's a balanced spectrum. There's a lot of great options for different kinds of spectrums. The initial cost is low, power draw is low, efficiency is fair, and they have a wide range of applications. Then there's several types of fluorescents, T8s, T5s, there's T5HOs, high output T5s. I believe there's a bunch of them. They're cheap and they do the job, so they're pretty good. Then we have.
I'm so sorry.
No worries. I thought we'd get there. I'll just go through the rest of the slides here.
But environmentally, they're not good.
No, yeah, that's correct. They don't. They're not easy to dispose of, those tubes. Okay, so I was just going to finally recommend something. So I recommend a combination of LEDs and fluorescents for our kind of use. There's a ton of new LED technology, and it's only getting better. Like I said, avoid the red and blue ones if you can. There's even LEDs now that come with UV and IR bulbs, so you can have UV radiation on your plant, so it's easier to transition them back out to full sun in the spring. It also, like I mentioned, helps. Yeah.
I've read that you should protect your eyes when you're using that kind of stuff.
Yeah, definitely don't look at those.
I have adaptation issues. So yeah, I wouldn't look at them. I wear like some type of yellow glasses. Your eyes will go blurry in probably a couple minutes. Because I have 3 of them, so when I go rain or eat there and I'm doing my plants, I have to wear glasses now. Because one day I spent about an hour in there and I got back out and I went outside and everything was bushed. So yeah, I'd be very, very cautious.
So one of my final things to say is you want to know what you're setting up for. So first of all, know your budget. Like I said, it's a really deep rabbit hole. You can.
Connor is a recent graduate from the University of Guelph, and he gave an excellent presentation, and I hope he does more. I'm Nigel Saunders. Thanks for joining me today in the Bonsai Zone.